Welcome to What Not to Do. I'm Kyle Schmitz, and this is episode 6. I've got with me today Amanda Johnson, the executive director of the Howe Community Resource Center here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. When she was young, she was told that she would never be anything in life. And wait till you see where she is now. All right, I've got Amanda Johnson. She's the executive director for Howe.
Yep, Howe Community Resource Center.
Exactly, right. Here in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but you don't hail from here, right?
No, I don't.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so my story's a little different.
Walk us through it.
Yeah, so I am a military brat, proud military brat. My dad was in the military for 20 years, served with the U.S. Army. I've lived all over the world. I lived in Germany for the large amount of my childhood, for 9 years. And with that was afforded the ability to go to many different countries. So very interesting childhood. And then when I was a sophomore in high school, which is kind of those formative years when you're going to learn kind of adulthood and whatnot, I kind of went from the U.S. Army, where everybody knows everybody and the culture is very wide, to West De Pere, Wisconsin.
Nice, there you go.
And for anyone that grows up in West De Pere, Wisconsin, knows that was probably quite a bit of a culture shock for me. So I, in my sophomore year of high school, moved here with my family and have actually lived here ever since, but don't necessarily consider myself from Green Bay.
Yeah.
So just too much of a history. So
that's awesome, but enough time to adapt, enough time to blend in and whatnot, which is awesome.
For sure.
And family in the area, or are they spread out?
Yeah, so my mom and dad still live here. They've moved back and forth a couple times, but they live right in Green Bay. I have a brother who lives in California, and he has some children. And then I met my husband about 2 years after I actually moved here, and we've been married ever since. And he's from the area, so he's born and bred in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Fun. So he knows the ropes. He can make it.
He knows the ropes. So.
And we're sitting, for our listeners who can't see us, we're sitting at Copper State Brewing Co. We're actually drinking some Copper Rock coffee, which is delicious. Well, I should say I am. What are you drinking?
I have a nice cold Coke.
There you go. I love a warm
caffeine boost.
Absolutely. Well, cool. So for our listeners who don't know you, kind of sketch out your journey. Again, you're the executive director for a big nonprofit here, but you don't just walk into that role. So kind of start backwards and help us to kind of see, just map that out for us, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think my story is unique. As I said, I moved here when I was a sophomore in high school, and just due to the transition not being the best, kind of didn't really enjoy high school. Barely graduated high school. I think I needed a 1.5 to graduate, and I graduated with a 1.6. Oh. So needless to say, did not immediately go on to college. Worked in various jobs. I worked at the APAC. I worked at daycare centers. I became a CNA for a short 8 months. Realized that I never wanted to do that again.
That's a tough job.
Yeah, and then I actually was very fortunate to land at a school. It's a Montessori school in town. It actually still exists. And I became kind of an assistant teacher there, and then ended up spending the next 10 years of my life there, and transitioning from an assistant teacher to an actual teacher at the Montessori school. Yeah. And then had a family in that time, and made a really smart move to go back to college. Started back at college in 2002 when my first child was born. Yeah. And to say that was an easy road would be a complete lie. Just decided to start with TC classes, and while having both a toddler and then a newborn. Yeah. I have 2 children, and then my husband said, "Well, you might as well keep going." So then, at the age of 30, I enrolled in UWGB social work program.
Nice.
And I completed my bachelor's, and then my husband said, "Well, why don't we just keep going, because it's not going to get any any easier. And so I got my master's right away. So I graduated with my master's about 2 years after that. So I have a master's in social work. I say ha to my home ec teacher who told me I was going to amount to nothing. And I feel like that journey, both the teaching journey and then this wanting to be a social worker really kind of came from my childhood. Being a military child is not easy. We moved every 2 to 3 years. We had to become friends with people very quickly, and then we had to lose those friendships very quickly because I didn't grow up in the social media era where I could just hop on Facebook and say hi to my friends. So
no TikTok,
no Snapchat, no nothing that my children or children that are in the military today have. And the reality is it was a really different world. Even to call my friends would have cost hundreds of dollars if I'm living in Germany and they're back in the States. So the trauma, I think, of moving multiple times, and then my dad was in the military for 20 years, and personalities that come with being in the military can be tough. So we went through a pretty tough transition in my childhood, just with not necessarily getting along, and decisions were made that weren't always the best. And so I decided that when I did go back to school, I wanted to go to social work. And it's funny because my whole intent of going for social work was to go to a military base and be a social worker on the base. I'm obviously not there, that didn't happen. But once I got my social work degree, I worked in various jobs. I worked at the Sexual Assault Center. I worked at the Crisis Center. And I found myself at the Resource Center in 2012 as a parent educator. What's funny is I originally I had applied for the job and didn't even get a call back. And so my resume must not have been up to par. And then as it about 6 months later, a friend of mine at the time was on the board and heard that that the position was open again and encouraged me to reapply. At that time, was able to put in a good word for me, and the rest is history. So I started in 2012 as a parent educator, doing home visits with our families, and slowly, but also quicker than I would anticipated, moved up the ranks. In 2014-15, I was offered a chance to take over the parenting program under the executive director. And then, unbeknownst to me, about 2 years later, I would be faced with the decision to take over the entire agency. So our executive director chose to leave and pursue another passion. And so I had the choice to either stay with where I was at or to try to run the whole agency. And lo and behold, I was chosen to run the agency. I was the interim executive director for about 6 months before I became the permanent executive director. So this is actually my 2-year anniversary was this month. So the journey has been long, and it will continue to be long. But that's where we're at right now. So,
Did you ever reach back out to your home ec teacher?
Yeah, I did actually. I actually ran into her at the grocery store one day. And I consider myself a pretty empathetic person and can understand. Sometimes people make comments that maybe they will regret later in life. So it felt pretty good to be able to tell her. And I normally don't tell people in the grocery store that I have a master's degree, but in this case, I needed to make sure she knew. I don't know if she remembered me though. It was a little disappointing.
And it's amazing though, like, first of all, amazing story, and then secondly, things like that in life, and you take that energy, but you channel it for good, right?
For sure.
Because not everyone does that. Sometimes people take the bad stuff that comes their way, the things that they can't control, and they let it destroy them. Or they take the energy from that and they move that into destructive habits and a lifestyle.
Absolutely.
You didn't do that, and this is almost almost getting into what not to do, right?
Right.
But, you didn't quit either. We've talked about, and with other folks that have been on the podcast, life doesn't get any easier.
No.
So if you keep waiting, and like your husband said, it's not going to get easier.
No.
It's not going to get more convenient.
Yeah,
so if this is what we're going after, this is the goal, then let's do it now, you know.
Sure.
So well done.
Thanks.
So why? So I think you maybe touched on it a little bit, tracing your story, but for our listeners, kind of clarify like the why. Like, what's that driving pulse behind why you do what you do? Why the social sector? Why do you love that?
Yeah.
And why do you see yourself there long term?
Yeah. I believe every person that walks on this planet has potential.
Yeah.
I believe that potential can be used for the good, or it can be used for the bad.
Yeah.
And I think that what differentiates each person is the barriers that exist in front of us. And I do the job, and I work with the people that I work with because I want to remove those barriers or help them at least knock down some of those barriers that can lead them to their potential. And everyone's potential is different. We are not going to say as an agency that every single family that comes to our doors is going to be successful and is not going to fall back on hard times or is not going to fall back to, it isn't going to be in a perfect life that they want. But if we can remove even some of those barriers, and so when I started as a parent educator, that was my main goal. Because of what I had gone through with my family, I wanted to make sure that parents had the tools, because I don't feel like my parents had those tools. I don't feel like they had, especially from the military perspective, I don't feel like they had the tools to really do that transition of going from the civilian from the military to the civilian side of things with the family, but then also just parenting in general. Parenting, I'm a mother of two wonderful, bright teenagers who daily bring me to my knees. And there's plenty of books out there, but there's not enough support.
Yeah.
And so that's really the goal of our agency, is to support on all levels to make a stronger community ultimately. And I don't think we make a stronger community if we just continue to push those people aside and say, well, that's somebody else's problem. We need to make sure that it's everybody's not necessarily issue, but everybody has a solution for it. And I think we live in a rich community where there's many different organizations that are doing amazing work, and together it's only going to make our community stronger.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I mean, it can be so challenging in life. Like, we learn to believe certain narratives about ourselves, whether it's an entire family believing something about themselves or an individual believing a certain storyline about themselves.
Absolutely.
And it can be so defeating to where they have a hard time thinking that could possibly be a different story.
Absolutely.
They could possibly turn their life around and make different decisions.
Absolutely.
And I can see the work that you're doing to help them believe, someone telling them a different story, someone telling them it doesn't have to be like this.
Absolutely.
Which can be so encouraging and empowering for someone else to come along. Maybe they've never had anyone else in their entire lives come along and say the things that you're able to say to them.
Absolutely.
Help cast a vision for them that maybe.
And we try to do it younger, right?
Yeah.
We try to work. We work with families prenatal all the way up until the end of 5th grade at this point.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to get into those families when those children are babies, so they can start seeing the potential that they can have for their child. Because as a parent, we always want better than what we had for our children, right? And so if we don't get them prenatally and we're working with them at the school level, then we're working with those kids to show them that they can break that cycle.
Yep.
And a lot of our families are in that cycle of poverty where it's generational. They don't know any different.
Yeah.
And so if we can just show them even just a little bit of that, you can do it and you're worth it, then, statistically on paper, if I would have handed you my story and you saw that I barely graduated from high school and you didn't see the future part, you would probably pigeonhole me immediately and say, well, she's probably, maybe not you personally, but society, if they only saw half of my story, would probably have pigeonholed me into, I bet you she's got a couple kids, I bet you she's probably working a dead-end job, making minimum wage, and she's the one that's going to serve off my welfare, right? And it's until you see that second half of the story, and that's a lot of times what I'll start with when I meet families, and is everybody has a story, right? Everybody's story is different, but like you said, your story is not written. You get to write it your whole life, and you're constantly writing that story, and you're constantly erasing and rewriting and erasing and rewriting. And so the work that we do allows those families to know their story's important. Yep, the history's important, but we can rewrite the future. Yeah. We don't have to have it be like it was. We don't have to continue that cycle. Yeah. And so that's the exciting part, and that's our why.
Yeah, and you're really getting at the heart of even this podcast, right? Where you have proverbial parents that are helping that younger generation Absolutely. To not repeat the same mistakes, to go further faster than they could.
Absolutely.
Which is awesome. So cool. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Great.
Hey, this is Kyle. Well done on your decision today to be great. Those are my kiddos in the background. Hey, if you want more of this kind of content, find me on social media. We'll keep the conversation going. You can hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, at StartWithWNTD. Again, at StartWithWNTD. We'll see you there.
All right, so let's get into it. This is probably my favorite segment of the podcast because we get into, really things that you've done right, successes, but then we get into things that you've done wrong. And then we're going to look at that, and just like we were just talking about, how can you pass on those lessons to someone else so they can avoid those same failures and mistakes? You're living, breathing that every day in your current role, which is really exciting. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share. But so let's first start with this. As you look back over the course of your career, your own story, your own journey, give us some things that you've done right.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I did right is I never let the door stay closed on me, and I never took no for an answer. Yeah. So I barely graduated high school, and so I knew in my heart I was going to go to college. So it might not have been right away, but I knew I was going to go. So I didn't let that define me as I'm just going to be the high school graduate and I'm just going to be okay with where I'm at. Made it harder for me, obviously, but I've never been one to let the door close. And I think sometimes that can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing because I can be seen as stubborn, and I'm sure my husband would agree with that statement. But I don't believe in closed doors, and I don't believe in being told no. And as a result of that, I feel like that's why I'm where I am today. Is I didn't take no for an answer. I didn't take that home ec teachers, and write my story because of what she said. Right. And so kind of that prove them wrong attitude too, I think. Yeah. I think another thing I did right, and it's interesting because you're going to hear it on the flip side, is I was a yes person. Yeah. In every job I've had, I've been that yes person. Yes, I'll go above and beyond. Yes, I will do that for you, even if it's not in my job description. Yes, I will take on that additional responsibilities, even if you're not going to give me the pay. Okay, nonprofit world, we're not in it for the pay, obviously. But I think being that yes person opened up more opportunities for me than not. Yeah. And I think that that's important to, and again, you're going to hear the flip side in a couple minutes, but to get where I'm at today, I had to be that yes person, and I had to be that person that would sometimes sacrifice some things for to be that yes person. Time, maybe my own sanity, maybe my own self-care. And then I think the other thing I did right is I never gave up. Again, stubbornness, is I just don't give up. If you tell me no, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to think outside the box. We live in a world, in the nonprofit world, where funding is come as you go. It's not guaranteed. A lot of grants can get cut. Private donors can pull, and for no reason whatsoever. And so oftentimes you find yourself, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't fun. And you just have to you can't give up. You just have to keep going, and you have to make sure that as long as you're still in it and your heart is still in it, right? And you can wake up in the morning and say, this is still my why, then don't give up. Yeah. So those are, I think, the three things I've done throughout my entire life that I would say has led me to where I am today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard it said that authority flows to those who take responsibility, who take on that initiative. And oftentimes, you're taking on that extra weight, that extra load without the compensation, but it's a delayed gratification piece.
Exactly.
And that can flow, and I can maybe guess at the flip side of that.
Yeah.
And so let's go ahead and pivot into that. So so you did some really things right. You had just a great tenacity, perseverance, in a sense of grit. You took it out. You looked for opportunities to constantly serve, constantly take on more in your respective roles.
Sure.
But what'd you do wrong?
Yeah.
So as you're looking back through that journey, what'd you do?
So as cliche as this is going to sound, high school...
It's cliche for a reason.
Yeah, it's cliche for a reason. I had so much more potential than I showed in high school. And I regret not doing well in high school and taking the typical path of you do well in high school and you go to college, because I missed out on a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have the college stories that a lot of people have, or the friendships that came out of those college stories.
Yeah.
And it sounds trivial, but yet a lot of people in my life who have those stories, I think it shapes who they are.
Yeah.
And I have that's missing for me. So anyone listening to this podcast, if you have children or teenagers, or even if you're younger, high school is important. And it's not a make or break. I'm living proof of that. But I could have done better. I was a straight A student in college without much... master's program was hard, but I did okay with minimal, I had 2 kids, I had 2 babies, and I survived. So I imagine I could have done just as well in high school.
Yeah.
I made a lot of excuses in high school though, right? It's my family life, it's my home life, and so that's definitely, I think, one of the mistakes that if I could go back, I would do differently.
So how would you say that? So would you say, as far as telling someone what not to do, how would you phrase... would it be something like, don't give up on education, or don't give up on yourself, or in that? How would you phrase that?
I think it's don't give up on yourself.
Yeah.
And I did. I gave up on myself for probably about 6 years of my life.
Yeah.
So basically from when I was a sophomore in high school, even until probably 2 years into, my adulthood, I really did give up on myself. And not that any of the jobs that I did aren't important, but I was capable of so much more.
Yeah.
And I did. I gave up on myself. I think that's a really good way to put it. But it's interesting, because if I changed any one thing, my entire trajectory of my life would have been different.
Yeah.
I would have never met my husband. I would not have the children I have today. So it's
You might not be in the line of work
I may not even be in this line of work, correct. I might have been a publicist for a famous person, because at one point in my life, that's what I wanted to do, and so...
Or a home ec teacher.
Or a home ec teacher, right. Or, I maybe not even be in the social services world. And so it's interesting when you think of the things like, what would you do if you did differently? But in so many cases, the entire trajectory of your life changes. And so it's hard to imagine doing anything differently, because you like where you're at today, right? Despite all of the bumps and the bruises.
Yeah,
so.
it's amazing. Yeah, in a lot of ways, we wouldn't author the same hardships or the failures that we've experienced and gone through. But they make us so strong today, and they make us fitting and equipped to do what we're doing today, which is huge.
Absolutely.
And even the idea of not giving up on yourself, even from a point of learning and growing. I think that's the point of education. Isn't just a one-time, hey, here's 12 or 16 years of your life. It's really that you're acquiring the tools to continue to learn the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
And you wonder how many people have given up on themselves today.
Absolutely.
They've stopped learning. They've stopped actually investing in themselves to get better, to even take on a higher level of mastery in whatever their line of work is, or their respective roles in life. And that's a sad thing, right? It's not just a one and done type of thing, but don't ever give up on yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Cool. So what else?
So when I came into this role 2 years ago, I thought I could do it all on my own, and I didn't need any guidance from anybody, because for me, guidance looked like weakness.
Yeah.
So if I reached out to any other executive director, or if I reached out to anyone that was in the field, I felt like I would be saying, I'm not supposed to be in this job. This job, I'm not capable of this job, because if I can't do this without asking you for advice, then I'm not. And I almost burned myself out in year 1.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah.
Completely. And going back to that, I was a yes person. I realized very quickly that I could not balance both my personal, my children, my husband, my enjoyment, right? With that go-getter, never say no, never ask for help. And at the end of the first year, I remember looking at my development director and saying, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This is crazy. I don't see my family. And because I was under the impression, because I wasn't talking to anyone else, that this is how you were supposed to do the job. You were supposed to be working 80 hours a week, and you were supposed to be exhausted, because if you weren't exhausted, you weren't doing the job, right? And so I was really fortunate about a year in to be contacted by, I'm part of this nonprofit kind of leadership group where we meet monthly and we talk about basically, everything we're going through, and we go through issues and things like that. And it was really a kind of a epiphany to me that, wait a minute, they're all, regardless of if it's a 30-year executive director or a brand new executive director, we're all facing the same things, right? Yeah. And so when I started to be okay with asking for help, and then I started to be okay with, okay, I can go home and it's 5 o'clock, that's okay. I can go home and be a mom. I can go home and, do the sports things or whatever I need to do. It doesn't mean I'm not doing my job. Yeah. And so that was probably the what not to do is you have to ask for help. And it's not just the nonprofit world. I think it's in any aspect of business. If you think you can do this in isolation, you're going to burn yourself out.
So would you say something like don't go it alone, or would you say don't think you have all the answers? How would you phrase that?
Don't be afraid to not be okay, because you're not. There are going to be moments where you are not okay. You're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to feel like you're not doing enough. You're going to, be it the funding or the staff you work with, and sometimes you have to be okay with just not being okay, and then reaching out and sharing that with someone.
Yeah, just saying, I need help.
I need help.
Not okay.
Right.
I need help.
Exactly. Like maybe I just need you to listen to me. Yeah. Maybe I don't need anything from you, but I need you to listen to me. Yeah. And so once I started doing that, it became a lot easier.
Yeah. And it's even another flip side on the idea of, saying yes being one of the things you did right, and taking on responsibility and initiative, one of the things you did right. There's also the law of diminishing returns.
Absolutely.
And there's only so much responsibility or authority you can take on before you realize I can't do this all, right? And you get to that point where suddenly you're not okay. Suddenly the ROI isn't so attractive anymore. There comes that, I'm not sure if it's the threshold or a breaking point or something like that, and we all have to know and learn our own capacity for things. Absolutely. And know when we should be doing it, or if it's something we should be delegating, or if it's something we can just eliminate altogether.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so good.
Sure.
Yeah, so don't give up on yourself. Don't be afraid to not be okay. Anything else that you look back on your career and say, man, don't do this. I did this. Don't do this.
Yeah, I job hopped a lot. Okay. And that's just overall. And I'm lucky where I'm at today. Yeah. But I almost want to go back to some of those employers and say I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And when you see them, because I am in the nonprofit world, I see them out, and I almost feel like I have to go up and apologize and be like, I'm sorry I didn't give you my best, because I was trying to figure out who I was. Because I went into this thinking I wanted to do the child protective side of things, and then I realized really quickly I didn't want to do that. So I job hopped a lot in the beginning, and I if I could go back, I wouldn't do that. I think I would have established, and I would have given my all, even if I was still in that questionable time. I feel guilty about that, I guess is the best way to say. And I think job hopping is it's how you do it, right? And I don't feel like I did it right at times. I feel like I did it very selfishly and very much about me versus about being honest with people and being more genuine, right? And so I would say that that's probably one of the things I wish I would do differently. So
now, are those roles in the private sector or the social sector, or where are those roles?
All social sector. All social sector, yeah.
Yeah, and because I can that's a big debate these days, right? Because there's a lot of folks that do that. They kind of zig and zag. And from one perspective, that can be a good thing,
right?
Especially with at-will employment, the shifting. In corporations, it's not necessarily like you get, you put in your 40, 50 years, you get your pension, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
It's almost kind of like every man for himself type of thing. But then there's another predicament, another variable where, a lot of folks coming out of school, they don't really know what they want to do with their lives. They don't have a clear goal or direction or why. And so part of that job hopping comes down to experimenting, trying to figure out what they like. And it sounds like you're affirming in a sense those things. But what you're saying was not maybe good about your experience was you didn't, in that pursuit, you didn't honor the commitment or give it in a sense your all that you ought to have.
100%.
And maybe had you gone all in with whatever role that you'd accepted and committed to, if had you gone all in, maybe you could have discovered that why or a greater purpose through those things, kind of grinding through it. Is that kind of
okay. Absolutely.
So how would you phrase that? What not to do? As far as not necessarily not job hopping, but something more along the lines of being all in when you're committed.
Yeah, I think it's commitment. Yeah. It's you don't half-heartedly do something. Yeah. Right. And I think that's in anything of your life. But if you're going to do something, do it 100%. And I didn't do that in some of them. In the social services world, there's an impact of that, right? Like if you are half-heartedly doing a job, there are people's lives that are impacted by that. Yeah. Not that I don't think I was ever detrimental to anyone, but definitely looking back, there are some jobs where I'm like, I didn't give my 100% because, maybe I was experimenting, but I still could have given 100%. So for sure. In
a sense, every role within a company, whether it's private or public or social, in any organization, everyone's in sales, everyone's in marketing, so to speak. Everyone's representing the company, the brand.
For sure.
If you go out to a restaurant and the cook that day is not feeling like he really cares and makes a pretty sloppy burger, whatever it might be.
For sure.
Think about that person that's going to get that burger. They're going to want to come back, and that's a reflection on the brand.
For sure.
And the owners might be amazing, and the service might be amazing, but the food's like, And now it did create a negative ripple effect. And so the importance of, as an organization, all being on the same page and being all in.
Absolutely.
Not just kind of go about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so good. It's a good reminder for us all.
Yeah, for sure.
So, last question in this section. You gave us a handful of things you did right. You gave us a handful of things you did wrong, and really to help us not to do those things, or those that are looking along your path. But if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently? And again, another way to think about this question would be if someone came up to you, Amanda, and was like, hey, I want to take a similar path to yours, a similar career destination here, kind of my goals. How would you maybe advise them or counsel them to help avoid the same mistakes that you made?
I think going on that last point, I would encourage more of the volunteering versus hopping into a job. So there are so many opportunities to volunteer, and I think that's where you can get your is this what I want to do type of answer versus committing to an agency or giving your time to an agency and that agency investing time and money into you. So it definitely encourage, especially in the social services world, volunteer. Go check out multiple different agencies. Almost every agency has opportunities. So if I could do it differently when I started at the social work, I would have volunteered more to get some of those questions answered, and instead of working in the sector and then realizing very quickly that no, this isn't what I want to do. Whereas if I would have just volunteered, the impact wouldn't have been as great.
It's a different level of commitment.
Absolutely.
And it gives you a chance to kind of experiment and kind of test what you like, what you don't like.
For sure.
Without fully committing in a sense that, could have negative repercussions on the company or the relationship.
For sure. And then I think the other thing I would do differently, and this is going to sound, I think, maybe to some people trivial, but because I was so driven and I always have had like just this goal to be successil, is I've never really developed relationships with coworkers or with, I missed out on a lot of that because I was so just kind of eye on the prize type of thing. And I think that in a world that in the world that we live in, social connections are crucial, and I would encourage those to make those connections. You know, you're not always going to be best friends or in every job, but make those connections, because what's the last statistic, how many hours we spend in a job? It's something crazy, right? And if you think of you're actually spending more time at your job than you're spending with your own family, that's where your social connections are going to be met and made. And so make them. You know, don't be afraid to make them, and don't be afraid sometimes to have those social connections, because you can still be really successful and have social connections with people. And I think that's one thing that I feel like I missed out on, because I just always felt like that wasn't what work was for. I was there to get a job done, and I'm successful, but what's to show for that at the end, right? Like, you know, I don't have a lot of social connections. I don't have a lot of close personal friends. And that's that could be a good thing and a bad thing. But I feel like if I would have invested a little more time on that aspect of it, it might have been a different story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And especially because they're going to be people that are maybe like-minded to you, right?
Absolutely.
They're going after similar cause and purpose. And what's the saying that, you know, we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with?
Absolutely.
And obviously, work is a huge part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And it, like you said, you don't have to be best friends with everyone. Maybe you don't even like everyone. That's fine. But looking for ways to be able to serve, to invest in their relationship, to help them go farther.
Absolutely.
And realize that in it together, you're part of something greater than just yourself.
For sure.
Can give you that sense of connectedness, relationships. And then, from there, folks that you might become really close friends with.
Right. Well, and I think it also benefit you professionally, because I know there's a lot of the successful executive directors today who, because of those social connections they made through previous employment, they can simply call up and say, hey, you know so-and-so, can you get me a cup of coffee with them, right? I don't have that.
Who's got my money?
Exactly. Like, I don't have those social connections, so sometimes I have to work harder because of that, because I don't have those people that I can say, you know, and then I run into people that I've worked with, and it's just a very cordial, you know, hi, how are you type of thing. I would never think of asking them for, and in the nonprofit world, that's part of our job, is to connect with people. And so I'm getting better at it, and I happen to work with my best friend, who is my development director. She was the same friend that got me the job in 2012, and we've somehow been able to successfully navigate remaining very good friends while actually being a boss of that friend, right? And so it's a unique situation, and I'm grateful for that, because I think that it also can make your job fun. It can make your job easier when you truly connect with someone at that level. So,
for sure, yeah.
For sure.
That'd be a whole podcast in of itself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hey, so you're still listening, which means you like it? I think so. If you do, share this with somebody else who you think would not only like it, but be helped by it, and join us in our mission to make the world be great.
Yeah, so I really like that last section. There's some really good stuff in there. And especially just on the idea of don't give up yourself. We were just chatting a little bit about that, and it's so important. And it's amazing, you know, there's people that come along in our lives that don't let us give up on ourselves. And sometimes indirectly, sometimes directly. Maybe it's a book we read, we've devoured everything by a person, and they've been so formative to us, but we've never met them, you know. Or maybe it's a parent or someone that we know that's really close to us, or a teacher or something like that. Maybe it's someone like the home ec teacher that says one thing, and you take the energy from that interaction that was, in a sense, really negative and destructive, and you channeled it and you made it really positive. Sometimes those are people that can have the main impacts in our lives. So I'm curious to hear from you, as far as like a mentor or someone that has been really impactful for you in your journey in your life. And there might be many, but who's one that comes to mind? Yeah.
So I shared a little bit that the transition back to the States and civilian life was not necessarily a super positive one for my family. And I was about 17 and a half, and an aunt of mine had offered to kind of have me come live with her because things were just really rough at home, and my dad and I weren't seeing eye to eye, and so my parents came home, and they were less than happy that somebody was, you know, wanting to take me for a little bit, and so we went to the police station. And there was a social worker there, and I won't say her by name, but she looked at me after interviewing and saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I said, I just want to go live with my aunt. I think it would be better right now. There's just a lot of, stuff going on, right? And she looked at me and she said, you should be really grateful for the family that you have. And you can either go home with them tonight or you can go to the local shelter for kids where you're going to probably not have a really good night. And I looked at her and I went home with my dad that night, and my dad and I are fine today. We've gone through a lot, but we're fine today. And I told myself that when I eventually got what I needed to do to be able to do this job, so when I became a social worker, so this was when I was 17 and a half, I was going to do it because that woman, I don't ever want someone else to hear that again. I don't want ever someone else to be in that same situation as I was, and those are the choices. Yeah. To either go home to a chaotic home where it was not positive, it was toxic, yeah. Right, on both sides, or to be able to go to a place where it sounded really scary, right? So not a mentor by any means, but definitely impactful. And a story that I still tell today because I think that I've done that. I think I've provided the tools so far for families. I've sat in front of, I currently volunteer as the 5th grade basketball coach for the Howe kids.
Awesome.
And we have some boys who come to school and they've got backpacks full of trauma. Yeah. Some of them are experiencing homelessness, some of them are experiencing hunger, all of them are experiencing poverty. And if I can be that one person that says to them, you're worth it, and I can be the opposite of what that person said to me, basically, because what she basically said to me was, I don't have time for this. You're not worth it. There's more problems than you, right? And so that was impactful for me and has stuck with me for my entire life. I would say the other person that was a mentor for me was a teacher who did believe in me, and it was my college teacher, and she's unfortunately, Karen Dahlke was her name, and she unfortunately passed away unexpectedly a couple years ago, and it was a Saturday class. It was my very first class at UWGB. It was like a social justice class. And I got to class late because I think the baby was, sick, and I came in and I was just an absolute mess. Like, I had no business being there, but I knew if I wasn't there, I'd get, you have to go to school, right? It was a Saturday class. And she said, can I talk to you for a second? And she pulled me outside and she said, are you okay? And yep, I'm okay. I got a lot going on. And throughout the semester, got to know her really well. And at the end of the semester, she pulled me aside and said, you're going to be a damn good social worker, but you're actually going to be an even better person. And for that person who I respected so much at that point, and she was very social justice minded, she believed in the ultimate social justice, was why I continued to do the path I did. Because on that day, and I unfortunately, they talk about you wish you would have told somebody before it's too late. I remember hearing about her passing away and thinking, man, I never told her what she really meant to me. And I remember writing to her family and telling them, but it's not the same, right? But she made an impact on me because she made me believe in myself, and I had lost myself for so many years, and she made me believe that I could do something. So my hope is wherever she is, whatever belief anyone has, that she sees that I'm doing something. So
you're carrying on her legacy, and how she breathed life into you, and you want to do that for these little kids that might not,
for sure,
have it at all. They're just trying to gasp for air.
For sure.
I've heard it said that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to it, and that is amazing. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the home ec teacher. Mm-hmm. You mentioned here about one of the most formative persons in your life was someone that was negatively impactful in a sense. But it was out of your control. Mm-hmm. You couldn't control how she was going to handle things. But what you could control is how you would respond to it.
Absolutely.
And look at where that's taking her now.
Absolutely.
That's amazing, And that's good for all of us to remember. We can't control some things that happen to us, but we can control how we respond to it.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
So, a lot of people want to give advice.
Yeah.
A lot of people think they've got the best advice.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
I want to know what's some of the worst advice you hear floating around. And it's kind of like, just think about if you were, cranking away at a coffee shop doing some work and you heard someone, over at table 7 say, oh, you should go do this, that, or the other thing. And you're like, just makes you cringe and you want to get up off your chair and just go interrupt the conversation, say, don't do that,
Yeah.
What's some of the worst advice you hear floating around?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you hear, especially with, and I talked to this a little bit about, but is that, being an executive director means you have to be exhausted all the time, and you have to be working, literally till way past everybody else's work. So I've heard it be said that is how you're successful, and it's not. It's not. I think the other thing is, I don't know if it's more of a business advice as much as when I hear somebody say, well, anybody can just pull themselves up from their bootstraps. Just pull yourself from your bootstraps and get down and dirty and get to work. It's not that simple. Yeah. It's not that simple, and there are barriers in front of everybody. Yeah. And so I think from an advice standpoint, when I hear that, I cringe. Yeah. And then, like I said, just that, expect that you're going to be exhausted. Why? Why do I have to be exhausted? Because I don't. I'm running a very successful nonprofit right now. I came out of I participated in a campaign last year and raised $65,000 with the help of my development director in 24 hours. I think we're doing okay, and we're not exhausted, right? So you don't have to be exhausted to be successful. That's what I would say. Yeah,
that kind of mindset of just like, keep banging your head against the wall till it breaks, type of thing. And, there can be a time for that kind of grit and perseverance.
Absolutely.
For sure. But there's also a way to say that it's not just about hard work for hard work's sake.
Right.
It's also about what's going to be most effective, what's actually going to help us to get there. And sometimes with that leverage, working smarter is more effective.
Absolutely.
And so like you said, it's not just necessarily black and white. Every situation demands a careful look at things. And we got to just keep pressing forward, and let's just do that. If we got to be smart about how we do, but we got the kitchen crew, hanging out. And
right. Hey, they're playing some 90s R&B. Yeah, we're good.
That's so good. What's the name of this group? Pussycat Dolls?
Yeah, Pussycat Dolls. Yeah, you had me pause there for a second. I wasn't sure.
There you go. We're bumping here at Copper State.
Exactly. We just need the dance floor.
All right, last but not least, it's rush hour in every major city across the world. Internationally, billions of people are hustling and bustling, probably listening to What Not to Do, right? Their favorite podcast. And it's they look up and they see a billboard, and it's your billboard. Billions of people are looking at your billboard right now. What message do they see?
Yeah, so I'm going to steal this a little bit because my son went to a camp a couple of years ago at St. Norbert's called Bold Camp, and it was a leadership for kids. And he came home and he said, Mom, I'm going to make sure my dash is important. And I said, what? What are you talking about? And he said, and I think this is my mantra. There's 2 dates that are concrete, the day you're born and the day you die. The dash in the middle is you get to make it whatever it is. And I think that's what I want to be known for, is what was my dash? What did I do between those 2 concrete dates that was impactful, that was more than just me, and that when people think about me when I'm long gone, that dash was impactful enough for them to not necessarily remember my name, but to remember what was the impact I made.
Yeah.
So I remember hearing that and thinking that's what it boils down to. We die, we live, but we control, like we've talked about this entire podcast.
Yeah.
What do you control? You can't control the day you're born, you can't control the day you die, but you can control the dash.
Yeah, that's good. I've never heard it put like that. I've heard that quote, but so what would you say, what would the billboard actually read?
Yeah, she killed that dash.
She killed that dash, or would it be like, make sure your dash is important?
Yeah, make sure your dash is important, or make sure your dash is impactful. Make sure your dash
don't waste your dash.
Don't waste your, there you go. I think that's perfect. Don't waste your dash.
Don't waste your dash.
Because it's short, right? It's really, in the grand scheme of time in life, a short dash, and don't waste it. I like that. Don't waste your dash.
Don't waste your dash.
That's what I'm gonna put that up at work. I like that.
Well, we all have a dash, right?
We do.
And it's important. And again, it gets back to the heart of the podcast here. It's don't waste your dash. We don't want others to waste their dash. So any way that we can help them to be successful, whatever their journey, their goals, their endeavors are, like we want to help them that to make the most of it.
Absolutely.
And I think about doing that. It's like it's like building a building. If you're laying each layer of bricks. Well, if you put down a layer of bricks just to take it off again, you're never going to build the building, right? And I think just like for human society, I think this is a picture of what we're trying to build in community, and we're really standing on the shoulders of others that have gone before us, and we're laying on top of their work, their foundation. The point is that we can actually complete that building and keep on building another layer, not having to start over every generation or in every endeavor. And so important. Don't waste your dash. You heard it.
I like it.
Well, Amanda, this has been so good.
Yeah.
It's such a helpful conversation, and I really hope others are helped by it too. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I came away from that conversation with Amanda absolutely moved. I mean, I don't know about you. I've never had someone in my life tell me I will never amount to anything. I mean, have you? And the odds of overcoming that. I mean, I hear my own kids in the background right now. It's like, what could possess me to tell them that they will never be anything? I want the exact opposite. I want them to go further, faster than I ever could. And it's amazing the odds that Amanda has overcome to do just that. So let's recap some of the takeaways. And the first one, just so powerful. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on yourself. Change the narrative. Change the story. Right? Don't believe the lies and the fabrications that others are selling you about yourself and your limited capacity or potential. I mean, it's amazing how much potential and capacity that we have as humans. It's crazy. I think we downplay that to an extent. And it would do us a good to realize we are capable of so much more, but it does take clear thinking, planning, continuous learning, etc. Never give up on yourself. Never. Secondly, don't be afraid to not be okay. And I think this is also really important because it's easy to want to go it alone. We've heard that in other episodes, and it's easy to think we got it all figured out. And we're trying to save face. We're trying to cover it up. We don't want others to know that we're hurting or we're struggling, right? Don't be afraid to not be okay, and be vocal about that. And lastly, don't half-heartedly commit. If you're going to go into something, go all in. Don't half-heartedly commit. If you're going to go into something, go all the way. The key here is to be discerning as far as to what you commit to, right? Does it align with your purpose, your goal, your one thing? If it doesn't, don't do it. All right, well, I want to thank you again for listening and remind you that this is about you. This is about equipping you for success and taking stories like Amanda's and distilling it and understanding the principles here, the successes, but also the failures, leaning into those failures and hopefully giving you something tangible and tactical that you can take away to be great, to avoid those same mistakes on your path to greatness. If you want to connect with Amanda, her contact info will be in the show notes, as well as her top 3 books. What do you think she recommends? What does she read? What would she have you read, or what would she give away as a gift? Which book? Really exciting stuff, so check that out. And if you've been helped, again, by this episode, please share it. Share it with a friend. Share it with others. One of the best ways you can do that is by giving us a 5-star review on whichever platform that you're listening on. That would really help us get the word out there more. This message about the importance of leaning into our failures, discussing them. Why? Well, not so that we can stop there. Failure is not an end. It's not a dead end. It's not the goal here. We want to be great. We want to push through the failure, use it as a friend, not a foe, in order to be great and to see massive success. And so that's what this is all about, and it's all about you helping to achieve that. Well, it's been said that good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men, they learn from the mistakes of others. So go and be great, and we'll see you next time.